This week we head to Donut County to get the mages to turn our icing gray. This and more on episode 164 of Indie Game Riot. Indie Game Riot! Hey everybody, I am Josh, joined once again by Mr. Ian McCammett. To my right.
Yo.
Did I look the right way? I don't even know. I forget if my camera's reversed on here. Hold on, let me look. Yeah, I did look the right way. I have my face covered with a different window. But anyway.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, we took a bit of a break for the holidays / sicknesses / mental health break. So that sort of stuff. It was like, all right, well, Christmas and New Year's. Let's start fresh in 2019.
People take holidays off, right? That's a thing.
What are holidays again? But anyway, we're back. And with episode 164, if you didn't catch the intro, I was explaining to Ian and everyone in live chat that, for those of you listening to the recorded version, that there are, in that intro, if you figure out the word, if you translate it into French, there's a word in there that you'll get the joke for, like, quote joke. It's not really funny, it's just, you know how we are with our intros, or I should say I am.
Hilarious. That's how you are with your intro.
Hilarious. That you'll get what I was going for there. Anyway, doesn't matter. You can play that game outside of our time. How was your holiday break?
That was pretty good. My dad and my sister came up to visit, and we hung out with my girlfriend's family a lot. So that was busy, but it was nice. And then in between that, I finally got a chance to sit down and actually slaughter some fucking games. So yeah, I played I started out the break by going into my Steam library and picking the 15 shortest games, right, based on HLTV.com estimates, and then I just played them all over the course of 3 days. And then after that, I played Ashen, the new Dark Souls clone.
How is that? I was kind of interested in it, and I don't.
It's good. It's too short. I would describe it as an excellent first 1/8 of a game. But it's really good. Fundamentally, its mechanics are identical to Dark Souls, but its entire philosophy of gameplay otherwise is pretty different. Heavy emphasis on co-op at all points, with a passive multiplayer experience.
Did you
which
play
is really
co-op?
good. Yeah. Well, you as long as you are in the same area as a similarly leveled player, you will be automatically match made. And the moments where I was playing with a fellow human were definitely the most rewarding sections of the game for me. I beat the game very quickly, and I started to get the impression that I was perhaps the only person who was moving through the game that quickly, because there was nobody else playing in the later levels once I got there. So, but it was good. It was good, and then so it's this Dark Souls thing, but it's in the structure of a Western RPG. So there's quests and NPCs to talk to and shit like that. There's this whole campsite building element to it.
Now,
yeah,
you mentioned it being short, and without going into a huge discussion, because we've talked about it before, but I'm kind of curious. I'll condense it into a more specific question so we don't go too off track. But do you correlate price worthiness with game length?
It depends.
How much is Ashen?
Well, so Ashen is $40 Canadian, which would probably mean it's about $30 US.
So is it worth that to you?
That length? I mean, yes, yeah. I thought it was fair. You know, I don't feel bad about spending that money on it because it was such a great time. And I could go back and I could actually play the hard mode that I unlocked, which is pretty cool.
But so here's my thing: by essentially complaining that it's 1/8 of a game, do you really feel that it's worth that much money? Because I feel like if it was worth that much money, you would be like, it was short, but you know what? I got my money's worth.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the funny thing about 1/8 of a game when you're talking about, a Dark Souls like. I mean, it took me about 20 hours to beat Ashen, which is a solid single-player campaign. You know what I mean? I mean, there are plenty of $60 titles that are less deep mechanically that go for more money than that. So yeah, I mean, we're talking like 8-hour first-person, 6 or 8 hour first-person titles that go for $60. These AAA titles. So Ashen being a 20-hour RPG, that's fine with me. When I say that it was too short, what I really mean is that it just left me wanting to continue playing it. I wanted to continue to exist in that world. I would love to see some, expansions. If they were free DLC, that would be fucking incredible. But I would be so surprised.
All right. Well,
I mean, A44 should make their money. I mean, for a small team for their first title emulate, an incredibly deep RPG. It's a hugely ambitious project, and I think they did it quite well. So.
I won't debate you on it. It's just kind of curious because we've had full out discussions about that sort of like what,
oh, yeah.
what like how do you determine whether a game is worth its money or not, and maybe we can have that discussion between you and I another episode.
And it's totally valid too. I just want to point out that I'm not necessarily applying a universal formula to Ashen. And there are incredibly brief games that I played that were like $15 that I felt were like deep enough or rewarding enough that it was cool, and goes the other way too. So it's a case by case basis for me, really.
Yeah. I mean, look at Fallout 76. That's essentially infinite amount of playing time. And is that worth $60? Absolutely not.
I'm
Which is
sure
why
not
they
gonna
discounted
pay for
it 75% immediately after.
Yeah, fuck that shit. So then I wrapped up my break by back to backing the Shadowrun Returns and Shadowrun Dragonfall. I just started Hong Kong last night.
I did see you were playing a little bit some of the games that I got you for Christmas, or gave to you for Christmas, I should say. Did you enjoy Count Lucanor? I think I saw you playing.
Yes, Count Lucanor. Man, that was not what I expected it to be.
Hidden gem, right?
Yeah, I also, like, when I went into it, I started it out and I was like, oh, this is, like, cute, but it's I don't know, it doesn't seem like there's much to it. I wonder what Josh was going on about. And then I was like, oh, actually, this is a completely different genre of game than I thought it was. Mm-hmm. I don't want to spoil it for anybody out there, because it really does throw you for a loop when you realize the kind of game you're actually playing. But I thought it was cool, for sure, yeah.
And now you're excited about Far Alone Sales.
Yep.
Did you get to play that?
So it's funny that you mentioned that one, because that one charges $20, and I actually would not do not think that is necessary. That's a little bit overpriced, I think.
Really? And that's the one you were most excited about.
And don't get me wrong, it's a fucking fantastic little game, but it is just that. It is a tiny game. It is incredibly brief. I finished it in under 3 hours. It involves incredibly simplistic sort of puzzle mechanics. Limbo is basically the same like depth of game, same quality of game for half the price. That's definitely an example. If it had coupled its platforming with like ship upgrades or things in RPG elements that gave it a similar depth to Ashen, well then maybe it's $20 $20 for a 3-hour runtime might be okay. But it's still hard to like. Yeah, it's hard to say.
Fair enough. I was curious.
It was good though. It was very good. Get it on sale, and you'll like it.
Or if you just have the money, you can still support the devs and just throw $20 at it.
You can. If you're wealthier than me, by all means, $20 is not that much to spend on a work of art.
You hear that, rich people? Yeah, so for me, we had a standard holidays. The kids made out pretty well. I got some like new slippers and a wallet and a belt. Dad things. I guess now, I looking at it now, I think I get dad presents now, which is fine.
Congratulations!
I did
transcend.
I did get myself a little bit some games with some money I was given. Excuse me. One of the ones I got was Enter the Gungeon. I finally got that for myself, and good time with that. I'm not too bad at it. Surprisingly, I thought it was going to be horrible.
I've heard it's incredibly punishing.
On my very first run, I got to, I think, the 3rd floor out of the 5. There were some other like secret floors too, but I did pretty well. I was surprised. I did watch some gameplay, so I kind of knew what was going on, but it's different when you're actually playing it. And then New Year's was good. So New Year's around here, I think I talked about it before, but it's always like just so cringy. If you like go to the town New Year's thing. So around here in Lebanon, it's famous for bologna, right?
No kidding.
Or excuse me, bologna. They have Lebanon bologna, and it's not like the Oscar Mayer type that you put on a sandwich. That nasty congealed, whatever that is. It's Lebanon sweet bologna, which is much darker, almost like a reddish purple. It's mostly brown, but it's got like a reddish purple tint to it, and it has like flecks of like white and black, probably like pepper and stuff like that in there. It's very good. The bologna is very good. I suggest it if you're around here. If you don't have it where you're living, if you ever end up around here in the Pennsylvania period, it might even be sold a little bit farther than that. But get yourself some. It's good, especially with cheese and crackers. But anyway, since this town is famous for that, they normally on New Year's they actually have one of the local companies make like a very heavy, very large like thing of bologna, and then they drop that, you know what I mean, for New Year's, and then they end up donating it to like a food bank or something. This year, they got the bright idea to create what essentially came out to be like I guess a mascot of a bologna, but it was made out of paper mache. Which
you're talking about like a guy in a costume?
No, it was made out of paper mache. It was just like a guy, not a guy in a costume. It was just
like a statue.
It was a sculpture that they made out of paper mache, which was mistake number one. Like, it's not fucking kindergarten. You're gonna drop this as like a town thing. Why not get a fiberglass professionally made one? But anyway, paper mache, and it looked like goddamn Mr. Hanky wearing a top hat.
Oh my god.
And then they had it hold like a fairly, not as large as previous years, but a fairly large like actual slab of bologna, in its hands. And then they dropped that from like they have like one of those really tall fire cranes from a fire truck. And it was so cringy. And then it was raining on top of that, so it was not as many people there. And it was like almost as many city staff, like between the fire police and cops or whatever that they had there, as there were people like just there to attend. It was so like, I took pictures of it. It's on my phone, but it was very, very Lebanon-esque. I'm not surprised. But 2019 is nice to get out of the 2018, I guess. Something just want to update because of it happening tonight. Is that for those of you that give a shit about sports, the Eagles, I'm very excited about this, so I'm going to talk about it, is that the Eagles made it to the playoffs, and then tonight won the playoff game by 1 point after the opposite team missed a last-second field goal, and I'm very excited, so go Eagles. Anyway, that's that. Also, if you're curious, if you want to see something interesting, go Google Alan Hearns, H-U-R-N-S, leg break. And you can thank me later. I almost said thank you later.
Thank you later.
Yeah. Thank me later for that one. You're going to Google it now, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll let you Google it. In the meantime, we'll move on to Indie News Injection.
Are you bored with the same old games?
Yeah.
Why, then give yourself an Indie News Injection.
Thanks, Indie Games.
This week on Indie News Injection, the very first thing I want to talk about is now that is January. I don't know if you're excited or incredulous at this point because of last year, but now that it's January, I've begun to slightly plan IRX 19, Indie Revolution Expo 2019. So hopefully with the help of, I know Vance is helping and Zach is helping. Ian, I still got to see when you're available and then prep hopefully.
You said it's a weekend, right? It's a Friday to a Sunday? Thursday to a Sunday?
Friday to a Sunday. Friday through Sunday. It's a very long and arduous thing, but it's a lot of fun and it's very rewarding.
Yeah, I'm glad to help out as much as my schedule will allow. So,
I'm hoping to always have at least one person with me throughout this. So I'm hoping I can work it out somehow. But anyway, we'll get that figured out. Anyway, point is that I'm starting to plan it. I'm keep getting my list together of people to email, and we got to set up some rules. Probably not going to do multiple games from one studio this year so we can make room for other games and stuff like that. Got to set up presenters and see if there's anything new that we can add to it, and got to also set up the RX Jam. So a good time. So anyway, keep an eye out for that. By the way, here is the logo because I forgot to put it up. Anyway, next up, the other announcement is that Riot of the Year happened. We don't really make a big deal out of it as we have done in previous years at this point, just because between money and time and stuff like that. But we still want to give props to who we end up calling essentially the best indie game of the year. And how we did it this year is that I came up with, out of all, first of all, I should tell you the rules for those of you that don't know. Riot of the Year is always games nominated out of from November of last year through until November of 2018, I should say. So from November 2017, November 2018. Between that time period, all the games that we've covered on starting the Riot for the podcast are eligible to be nominated. Out of those games, I narrowed it down to, I think, for how many I actually narrowed it down to. It's on Discord. Point is that I narrowed it down and then left it to a vote. And the winner of 2018 Riot of the Year is. You want to give a drum roll?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really do it. There we go.
I just wanted to make it awkward. It is Frostpunk. So congratulations, Frostpunk, for being awesome. Also, what we did this year for that, we usually do a giveaway for Riot of the Year every year, is we randomly chose someone who voted for a game, and this year's winner was Sweet Ruin in the Discord, because this is all done through our Discord server. If you haven't joined that yet, you should do so. Links below. But we chose a winner who voted on our Discord, and that was someone who goes by the name of Sweet Ruin. So congratulations. They ended up picking Dungeons 3 for their free game, because we have like a free games list that we maintain. That's what they picked. So congratulations. Next up, speaking of congratulations, there are a whole bunch of indie games that were nominated for the Steam Awards this year. A lot of awards going on at the end of the year, of course. But basically, they always have different categories for the most part every year. This year, the categories were Game of the Year, which is obvious, VR Game of the Year, Labor of Love, which is a game that is continuously worked on and updated, Best Developer, Best Environment, game that's better with friends, so Best Co-op Game, Best Alternate History, and Most Fun with a Machine was a game, which reading that now kind of sounds dirty, but whatever. So the nominees for Game of the Year, how about I start at the bottom? That kind of seems weird going backwards. Nominees for Most Fun with a Machine, as far as indie games go, I think, is Euro Truck Simulator indie at this point? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I know virtually nothing about the driving simulator world.
Anyway, if you consider Euro Truck Simulator 2 to be indie, that's there. Same thing kind of goes with Rocket League. If you we covered it when it came out, but at this point, is it really indie? And then Factorio and Space Engineers. Nier Automata was also put in there, but that's not indie. So, fuck them. My choice was by the way, they have not announced the winners yet. That's going to happen in February. But out of those, my choice was Factorio, because that's a pretty fantastic game. Another game we covered on a previous episode. Best Alternate History was mostly it's pretty much all AAA. It's Hearts. Who develops Hearts of Iron?
That's Paradox.
They're kind of borderline too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're generally considered a AA, right? So like Ninja Theory status, I guess. Yeah.
If you consider Hearts of Iron, that's in there, but it's pretty much all AAA for that one. So fuck them. Better with Friends. Some people consider, I know Prep does, they consider Payday 2 to be independent now that they bought the rights to it. I still don't. Dead by Daylight, technically independent, at least to begin with. And Overcooked 2 was the other independent game, which was my choice for best co-op game, Overcooked 2, because it's a pretty awesome game. Best environment for indies, Subnautica, definitely. Was the only indie there, and it was also my choice because that's a fucking beautiful game, and I have a really soft spot for anything underwater. I used to want to be a marine biologist, so that game was like right up my alley. Even though it's all fake animals, I know, but it's still like the whole point. Like one of the things about the ocean is the whole like the depths, like the Mariana Trench and stuff like that, and how unexplored it is. My imagination goes wild with like how little we know about what's down there. So Subnautica kind of like fills in some of that imagination for me too. I'm like, what if that was down there? You know what I mean? Like that. So I just love that game. So hopefully Subnautica wins there. Developer of the Year. The only one that's really technically CD Projekt Red is technically indie, but they're so large at this point. Paradox, again, if you consider them to be independent, but really the only one is Clay. Clay, who make Oxygen Not Included and Survive with Friends. Is that what I'm thinking of? Yeah. So there you go. Labor of Love, so like games that have been updated, the best game that's been continuously updated. No Man's Sky is a part of that, which I will say at this point they've turned it into a game worthy of love instead of vitriol. So congratulations to them to turning that shit around, and as well as Stardew Valley is up on there. So whichever one you think that is for you. VR Game of the Year, Beat Saber is there, super hot. It's really the only I guess VR Chat kind of. It's not really a game though to me. But those are nominations there, and then finally,
VR Chat is not a game to Josh. It's 100% serious.
Well,
strictly business.
Do you know the way?
Just the way that you phrased that was really beautiful. It's not a game to me.
Hey, Uganda Knuckles, our lord. So Game of the Year, again, the only one that's really kind of indie for Game of the Year, which is kind of unfortunate, is Kingdom Come Deliverance, which, by the way, I was actually pretty surprised about that. A lot of people did not like the end result of that game. There were a lot of bugs and issues with it, but I do like the game. It's a very hard game. But, you know, it's kind of independent. So that's your 2018 Steam Awards. Await February for updates as far as winners go. Here, speaking of updates, The Forest recently had a large update, and if you remember, The Forest is the horror survival game where you're dropped on an island with a big forest on it, and there's like these weird cannibal monster things, and kind of reminds me of what is that movie? Do you remember that movie from the 80s that was like they were like in the Amazon, some like cannibal tribe like tortured them and ate them?
Oh, was it a Cannibal Holocaust?
Yeah, that one. Kind of reminds me of that. But anyway, they just recently gave it a big update. For those of you who are interested, just wanted to put this out there because this is a free update. They are adding hang gliders, crossbows, and additional monsters. So if you want to jump back into it, you got something to look forward to.
I actually played this game for the very first time just before break started. There are a bunch of guys in my class who play it together, I guess.
Dex in chat said that Forest is kind of like Subnautica, where it's more terror than horror because they're slightly different genres. That is true. I will say Forest does have horror in it simply because there are actual monsters, albeit they're like... Well, I don't really want to spoil it. I mean, it's been out for a while. Well, anyway, plug your ears for like 10 seconds. The monsters are essentially like experiments, but there's also some kind of supernatural shit going on. Anyway, but I get what you're saying. That's the point. So going back to some more awards. Once I get this off here, going back to some more awards. Independent Games Festival is coming up, and I mentioned I think a while ago about the nominees or the like list of people who were nominated, and then they narrowed it down to the finalists. And I am really, really excited about this year because there are a lot of developers that I actually know and have been on Indie Game Riot, whether it be featured or actually interviewed, that are finalists for this year's awards in IGF. So best student game, I don't know most of them. I do know Engard just because Rev met those guys at Indiecade Prime over in California. But Engard is part of this student game. You can read I'll have a link so you can read the whole list. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But the Nuovo Award, which is like the experimental game award. The one that's really kind of tops my list, because there's a bunch of honorable mentions too, but one that really tops my list is Do Not Feed the Monkeys. We covered that recently. That was nominated for that. Excellence in Narrative, Wander Song, which is an interesting game. Genital Jousting, Excellence in Narrative. Am I missing something with that game? The narrative part of that? I don't understand that shit. Is that a joke? You know what that game is, right?
I mean, yes, but I haven't played it, which makes me wonder if maybe there's a if it's one of those games, one of those fucking cheeky ass games. Like, do you ever hear about Frog Fractions?
Yeah, I know that game and how it gets
yeah, games like
but
that,
it's not.
Where it's
as
like it's not okay. It's just a regular old game about genital jousting.
It's a multiplayer game where you're a bunch of dicks, literal dicks.
Is it particularly like humor? Is there written elements that are particularly amusing?
Not that I know of.
Okay, well,
I don't understand.
It's nepotism that
I guess
just sheer corruption.
Some other notables: Unavowed, definitely worth being there. I'm glad for Unavowed, and also Return of the Obra Dinn. Absolute fucking lootly. I love that shit. It's not shit, but you know what I mean.
I finally got a chance to play that as well.
Don't tell me anything about it.
I will not.
Excellence in Design, Do Not Feed the Monkeys once again. Return of the Obra Dinn once again. Opus Magnum, another game that we covered. Good selection there, as well as others. Excellence in Audio, Ethereal, Hypnospace Outlaw. Hell yeah. So Hypnospace Outlaw was made by Jay Tholen, which was the very first developer we ever interviewed on our show, way back years ago. So Jay Tholen, along with his crew of people, Mike Lash, Corey Graham, and then the other person that we've talked to over the years is Nelson. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce his first name, but we always called him Nelson, who writes freelance for like PC Gamer and stuff like that, but he is working on this with Jay, so great job to you guys. Moss, Return of the Obra Dinn again, Alto's Odyssey, and Paratopic, which actually I don't know that one, but
I'm a big fan of Paratopic.
Well, there you go. Thumbs up from Ian. Excellence in Visual Art, Alto's Odyssey once again, Hypnospace Outlaw once again, Just Shapes and Beats for those of you into the rhythm, and Return of the Obra Dinn, which is like... Hypnospace Outlaw is actually, I believe, nominated. It's 3 times and is in honorable mentions several times as well. But Return of the Obra Dinn is like sweeping this shit. And then finally the Seamus McNally Grand Prize, which is like the big cash prize and the big trophy and the best one. Minute, Opus Magnum again. One I don't actually know of. It's called Noita, I think is how you pronounce it. Return of the Obra Dinn, of course. Hypnospace Outlaw, also very proud of them for being nominated for the grand prize. And Do Not Feed the Monkeys, once again. See, we have good taste. There you go. So go check that out. Check out those games, because I actually got the chance to play a little bit of Hypnospace Outlaw, and it's fantastic. So keep an eye out for those games. And I think it's gonna be coming out soon. I got a PR thing from Mike Rose, the guy that's like doing their PR. He's saying it's gonna be coming out very soon, so be excited. So that said, I believe it's time to take a little delve into Dev.
Oh, fantastic!
And look at that brand new logo. Thanks, Prep.
Ooh. Yeah, that's nice.
Did you see the one where he fixed the U? Or the V that looked like a U?
I didn't see the original.
So anyway, go ahead. Take it away.
Yeah, okay. So the last time we were talking about random number generation in games, and we sort of started talking a little bit, because some of those games, the way that they manifest random number generation contributes a great deal to difficulty. And so that was sort of something that we talked a little bit about. And so this week I wanted to talk about difficulty specifically, because it's a pretty hotly contested topic in game development. I remember, last year, right, there was Cuphead was released, and there was quite a bit of dialogue about games and their difficulty and what qualified as gatekeeping and whether the experiences should be sort of graduated through multiple difficulty levels. And so that's why I wanted to. So I should, full disclosure, I'm a huge fan of challenging games. Well, but I have not always been that way. That's something that I've come into relatively more recently. And so I'm curious what other people think, and that's why I'm going to ask you, Josh, what do you think about difficulty in a game?
I will say that I do not consider myself just a casual gamer. That said, I'm not one of those people that has to have like the hardest of hard of everything, and I don't think I've ever gone through like a New Game Plus just for the hell of it, because I'm like, well, I've already played the game. I play games for the narrative more than challenge. Mm-hmm. That said, I do play games like I just mentioned, Enter the Gungeon. The roguelites are basically those games that are about difficulty. But the reason I play those games, things that generally hook me with that is that there's some sort of progression still in collectibles, and there is story like in Dead Cells. Even Enter the Gungeon has a story to it, and whereas Cuphead, there's a very shallow story, if we're being honest. It's like, hey, these guys sold their souls to the devil so they could win a thing, and now they gotta, get back so they don't go to hell.
So let's do some bullet hell shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But really, that's not what Cuphead's about. It's about challenge challenging bullet hell, and it's about the art and it's about the audio. It's about being retro. You know what I mean? That's what it's about. And it is a great game, but we were actually talking about it a little bit before Indie Fireside last night, because Vance doesn't like that game, and I hesitate to say that I don't like the game, but I don't play the game all that much because it is so hard, and all it does is make me angry. It's one of those games I would. There are people that enjoy that, and that is actually one of those games I would prefer to watch other people play.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, and that way I can be like with them in the moment and celebrate the victories and like to the failures, without really giving into the fucking throw my controller across the room aspect of it. I think that you mentioned the difficulty curve. That if they should have difficulty curves, I think it really depends on the game. Why when a game is made to be hard, and by the way, there is a difference between hard and fucking impossible. And also, we talked about randomization last time. Randomization is part of that and should not.
If anybody from Destruct Team actually is listening, there is a difference between hard and impossible. Just want to throw that out there for you guys.
There's another game called This Is the Game, I think is what it's called. That was kind of like that. It's insanely hard, and it's like, man, there's challenging, but like a good challenging game to me, and a lot of good roguelikes do this, is that like Dead Cells, I enjoyed that immensely, is that it's very hard, but I can every time I play it, I can feel myself getting better. I'm learning, and that is the progression, is you getting better. Whereas there are games that are hard, and you're like, this is just hard all the time, and I'm like, the only way I'm beating this is if I get lucky. That's not good difficulty. So I think that there doesn't necessarily have to be a curve. It can be hard from the beginning, but there has to be a way for you to learn how to get through that difficulty.
Yeah.
There has to be good tutorial moments, good learning moments throughout the gameplay, and not just difficult for the sake of being difficult.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, that's the thing. It's funny because this concept is contemporarily, it's so strongly associated with Dark Souls because Dark Souls made it such a selling point. But it's really just good game design that Dark Souls drew attention to, which is probably one of the reasons that indies have really pulled from Dark Souls so much in recent years. And that is the big surprise here is that it's not the difficulty that is actually the source of the fun. It's the structure that allows you to learn the system of the game and become good at it. So as a result, what you want is not like a brick wall that you have to chisel away at with a toothpick. That's not actually fun. That becomes tedious.
Yeah.
So difficulty certainly can't be an end in itself of game design. It has to be a means to creating an experience for the player.
Well, let me ask you about a specific game that is very obviously meant to be hard, but does not have that moment where, I mean, you do get better, but it's not in a learning kind of way. I think my music ended. Hold on a second. It's not in a learning way. It's more of just, I don't know. It's just repetitive, like muscle memory more than anything.
Yeah.
And that's Get Over It by Bennett Foddy.
Yeah.
What do you think about that game? Because and even throughout the narration in that game, it's like we took this idea from another game that I really enjoyed and about overcoming difficulties or whatever, and this is going to fuck you over. You're going to get angry, and it's up to you if you want to keep going or not. But does that make a good game?
Well, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is cute. That's what I have to say about that. I don't like Bennett Foddy's games. I do read his blog sometimes, and I think he's a pretty with it guy. I think that there's a lot of thought that went into Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, and I do think that it has a soul. It has a philosophy, right? And it is what it is.
But I feel like sometimes the philosophy
for that kind of game.
I feel like sometimes the philosophy sounds deep, but then I'm like, I feel like you're just trolling people. Like, yeah, like, oh, well, you could give up and that's okay.
Yeah.
But then there's like, I feel like there's like a very subtle like read between the lines of what he's saying and saying like, if you give up, you're a pussy. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, let me just to sort of clarify my position as well. When I say that game has a philosophy, I don't necessarily mean that it's incredibly profound. In fact, the impression that I get from it, I may be misreading the situation, and Fadi is kind of a weird guy, so he could have a different take on this than I do. But I do think it's like tongue-in-cheek or satirical in a certain way, and it like definitely didn't work for me. Nor did Quap, his original game that was very similar. Yeah. I don't like that shit. That being said,
Surgeon Simulator is another one.
Yeah, is that him as well?
No, but I'm just saying it's another game that's meant to be a rage game. Like that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's almost like how horror games like FNAF are meant to be YouTube Gold. That's what these seem like. They're like made specifically to be good on YouTube because it makes people angry and that's entertaining to watch, not because it's necessarily a good game in itself.
Yeah, and now that being said, you know, I do want to say that I think that I maybe Quap, definitely getting over it though, has resonated with a certain group of people. There are speedrunners who are really into that game and who consider it a speedrunning game. So my response to you would be that, like, while I am not a Twitch gamer, you know, per se, I do think that, like, yeah, muscle memory, it's sort of an athletic, you know, kind of interfacing with the game. I think it's totally valid. Obviously, there are people who really like that. You know, they get the same thrill out of, you know, playing a game that I get out of, like, practicing metal riffs on a guitar, right? So there's validity to that. It's not my thing. But you know, somebody who enjoys Ben and Fadi's games could probably shed more light on whether or not his design is tailored to scratching that itch. But I would suspect that for some people it certainly is. Super Meat Boy is the same deal for me. I like am not into that type of game at all. But I know so many people who just absolutely adore that game, and it really does have to do with the process of developing the knowledge of the level that you're navigating.
That's patterns right there. But that's a little bit different for me because the patterns kind of harkens back to old SNES games where almost every boss battle was about learning patterns, right? Yeah. You know, and the rule of threes and that sort of stuff. So. And plus, the other thing that something like Super Meat Boy has going for it is the quick respawn. You know, it's like death respawn. You know, and so there's very little like, oh, I have to go through this again. It's very fast paced. So
getting over it starts you all wherever you land. Yeah, basically, which is frequently right back at the beginning. So I mean, I can't completely decry it though, because this is one of those things for me that it's like, well, it really depends on how the difficulty factors into the overall experience of the game. So one of the reasons why, you know, Gods Will Be Watching frustrated me so much, and yet I still think it's a good game that is worth consideration, is because its difficulty and the sort of traumatic experience of playing it and the tedium all ties into this whole sci-fi story that they're trying to say. They're trying to put you in the shoes of characters that are actually feeling this way, and they're trying to get you to maybe deprioritize a perfect run through in favor of something that is perhaps a bit more complex and meaningful narratively, and I can respect that. I had the same experience with The Void that we did on Indie Fireside a while back, and
well, I think that had some poor gameplay design decisions involved in that one, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think arguably it did. Although I actually really think that there's a lot of smart shit in that game.
Yeah.
But then it's not always fun, which is interesting, because then it's like, well, you know, our games always does a game have to be fun in order to be a game, and then we get off into like a larger aesthetic discussion about books and movies and sad things and scary things, and that's not something that we necessarily need to get into here. But But I'll tell you what, in all honesty, I mean, first of all, I couldn't finish The Void. I don't have the time to put into a game like that. And another game that I couldn't finish was this month's Indie Fireside Lisa, which is also, insanely, punishingly, like brutally, mercilessly difficult in the context of a JRPG.
I don't know, like, because they were talking about it, and it seemed like Zach didn't have much of a problem, whereas Ian couldn't finish it, maybe for the same reason. So I think maybe it really based on the decisions that you made, because I guess there were multiple ways that you could go about things. I think depending on the decisions that you made, it changed things, and it could have made it really hard for you.
Yeah, so that's definitely the thing. But it's see, the thing about Lisa is that there's never a choice that is good, right? You either sacrifice a teammate or you sacrifice a limb, right? That's the calculus that it's working with. Or if you're like me, you like repeatedly walk off of 8-foot cliffs and eventually die from walking off of 8-foot cliffs because I guess your guy's really short and he lands on his face all the time. So then you can be like me, but I mean, I also struggle with turn-based, JRPG style combat. It's not a game system that's comfortable for me.
I'm in the same way, but that's more about patience than anything. I just don't have the patience for turn-based. Like, Pokemon is like the exception for me.
Yeah.
A lot of JRPGs, I'm just like, I don't want to grind. And same thing with MMOs. Like, I don't want to grind, and I don't want to sit here and take turns smacking each other with the same thing over and over. You know what I mean? Like, I prefer RTSs, over or like real-time classic RPGs I mean, you can pause them, but like the Baldur's Gate. And
real time and pause. I like that stuff generally a lot more too. Although I played Divinity Original Sin with a friend over the break for a short session, and that was a lot of fun. And that's turn based, and that actually sort of got me hyped on turn based to enough that I could play the Shadowrun games and enjoy them. But those are the exceptions that prove the rule. But that's more about my specific skill set than it is about the inherent difficulty of the game, I think. Like Lisa's is like you say, it's difficult because of the choices that you have to make that affect your ability. Like if you lose your arms, if you sacrifice your arms so that you can save your teammate, then you don't have the only combat maneuver you can use is biting people, and then you can't do damage. It's challenging. So then, the question becomes, okay, well, ultimately then why does difficulty matter? What is the point? What is the point of a difficult game? Is it to, create more fun, or is it to create a specific experience? And I think that the conflation of difficulty with fun, is something that you see in these games that you're talking about that I don't know, maybe Getting Over with Ben Foddy is a good example. There's probably a less divisive example.
There's a niche audience, right? That's the thing. I mean, Dark Souls is difficult, right? So I mean, that's kind of what it's known for, is being difficult.
Yeah.
Most people seem to like it. I don't, because of that reason.
Yeah.
I don't like the idea, and it's kind of why I stayed away from roguelikes for a long time. The idea of dying constantly and having to start again. You don't start from the very beginning in Dark Souls, but the point is that you start from the very last place you did a campfire or whatever. And you have to go through, and the monsters constantly. I hate it when things respawn in games. I'm like, I already cleared out the shit. That was my reward for playing through this part of the game. Why am I doing it again? I hated that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, and I think I mean, if you don't like the gameplay of something, then it's like me with JRPGs, right? It's just not going to resonate with you. I think I feel that even though Dark Souls is not for everybody, I do feel like it's a unique example, and I tell everybody who's into games, I've actually been harping on my buddy Erdem to play the fucking game, because he's lukewarm about it as well. But I'm just like, no, you should play it if only to understand why it is designed the way it is designed. because it's the perfect example of absolutely every aspect of the game is ties into the theme that they're trying to convey, and actually explicitly ties into the story. So like when you die in Dark Souls, it's not like an extra narrative thing. It's not something that happens outside of the story, or that like, oh, this is a fake timeline and actually the character didn't die, which is unusual in the game. Usually a death state is considered like a stopping point in this like timeline of the story, and then you start a new timeline, but in the canon of the game your character reaches the end, whatever. In Dark Souls that's not the case. If you choose to give up the game and set it down, then you've gone hollow. You're one of these things that is doomed to just sort of respawn indefinitely without any like driving agency, and I think that that's really cool. It also like has clever ways of like not punishing death, so you like keep your inventory and shit like that. You like lose your experience points, but since there are infinite of them in the world, it doesn't actually matter as much as it seems to. And then the other big thing is that like for me, see, I went in when I first played Dark Souls, I thought it was really hard. But then I realized that if I just like played really defensively, that it was not that hard. And then other people have found that if they play as a spellcaster, it's like not that hard. So it's one of those things where it teaches you. And I know Dark Souls isn't an indie game, so let's put Ashen in its place instead, since their combat is exactly identical. It's all about it's if you were I think. And I need to stop evangelizing people with Dark Souls because it's really pissing them off. Ashen. It's starting to piss them off. But if you go into Dark Souls with the same mentality of those old SNES games that we were talking about before, where it's all about learning the tells and then striking when you have the opportunity, it's rewarding. And that's honestly what I think sets Dark Souls apart, is that once you learn it, it's no longer hard. It can be challenging at times, but it's just a matter of like, oh, the game has presented me with all the rules and all the things that I need in order to learn how to like deal with the situation.
Well, I think the other part of it too, I mentioned grinding again with patience. Dark Souls is a game where you need to grind, because you mentioned infinite experience, but. And maybe Ashen's the same way, but in order to get more experience, you have to go through and grind the same fucking places 20 times.
You do have to kill enemies. That said, whenever I begin to get sort of discouraged, I just remember that somewhere somebody is running through the entire game without leveling up once, completely naked, like fighting,
not taking a hit.
Not taking a single hit, and that's when I just tell myself, well, you need to get good. But just before we close this dev delve, I wanted to take it away from Dark Souls and put it in a different example, because we both like point-and-click adventure games. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another area where you can see the logic of the design and how you teach the player to solve the puzzles. Becomes really important.
Supposed to.
Because if it's too easy, then you don't feel satisfied when you solve the puzzle, or you might even solve a puzzle accidentally and not get the little like dopamine hit that you get from like solving a puzzle.
Smart, right? Yeah.
Totally. But then on the other hand, you can have like early LucasArts or Sierra solutions to puzzles that are just, what do they call it? Moon logic, right? Where it just like doesn't make any fucking sense at all.
There's that one part in Grim Fandango that I couldn't get through for the longest time. The forest that you're like driving around in.
Yeah, the petrified forest.
Yeah, that shit was hard as fuck.
Yeah.
I couldn't figure that out for the longest time.
Yeah, no, that shit is tricky, and like I think this is why Dave Gilbert's games are so good. The ones that he actually makes, like the Blackwell games and shit, their signposting is absolutely excellent. I think I can probably count on one hand the times throughout his entire library of games that he's actually designed that I've had to that I've had to seek help from an external source. He's really good at making you feel powerful. I assume Unavowed is similar.
Unavowed and Francisco Gonzalez's games. He also does a really good job with his stuff too.
Nice,
but they all kind of follow that same Gilbert logic.
I actually just picked up Shardlight. Finally, I picked it up recently. The last couple of weeks. I'm gonna play that. I'm looking forward to it.
There is Vance played through his most recent one, Lamplight City, and he said that there is a. It's not like, because I see you wrote down unwinnable. What do you call it? I'm not on the thing.
Unwinnable states.
Yeah, so it's not an unwinnable state like King's Quest had in it. I remember that vividly. But there's like, you make these choices, and if you make a certain choice without really knowing the consequence, then you can't guide it back to, like, because you'll get a different ending. For instance, like, you'll fail a chapter, but it won't. You don't fail the game, but you fail a chapter, and therefore it changes your gameplay experience because you go through a different, line of narrative. And he didn't really appreciate that, so it's almost like an unwinnable state because you can't go back and fix it without like playing through the whole thing again unless you happen to have a save file.
Right.
But like I said, with like King's Quest, I think it was 5 or 6. I forget which one it was. There's one with the labyrinth, and
well, there's a labyrinth in both 5 and 6. So the labyrinth in 6 has a minotaur in it.
Maybe it was 6 then. It was 6 then.
Yeah.
Because there was one with a minotaur. There was a point where I think before you go into the labyrinth, or maybe it was right after, if you don't have a certain item that you picked up from earlier in the game, you're literally fucked. You can't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think there are 2 potential inventory items that you can use to mark your path out of the labyrinth, and if you don't get one of those, they're like super easy to miss too. I can't even remember what they are. But here's the fucking crazy thing about it too. Like, talking about niche audiences, I mean, there are actually designers who have really embraced the unwinnable states. Weirdly enough, specifically in the interactive fiction genre. I am not generally a text-based gamer. I don't really like it, but there are 2 games that I played probably 2 years ago, I want to say. 3 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
The first one is called Broken Legs by a designer named Sarah Moriarty, which is it's about these 6 girls who are competing to get into like sort of an analog for the Fame School. Right, and it's like horrifying the like shit they do to each other, right? But it requires making these like incredibly difficult moral decisions with incredibly like severe consequences, and it's super easy to like wind up down a dead end, which they really embrace. But before Sarah Moriarty did that, there was an interactive fiction piece that actually got some attention in the literary world, I think, called Make It Good, which is a detective story by a guy named John Ingold, and you play an alcoholic detective who's investigating a murder in a house, and it's one of the hardest like gaming experiences I've ever had. It's all text-based, and it involves these characters, these NPCs who are able to move freely around the house in the context of a text-based adventure game, which is like sort of mind-blowing. And it requires you to focus on the tiniest details to uncover the like clues to like solve this murder. It's incredibly brutal. And it's funny to me because
but that's kind of interesting because it's like kind of makes it more immersive in the sense that it's a little bit more realistic that way, because in real life you don't have things like it's almost like Blue's Clues in some games where it's like, where's the blood splatter, and it's like highlighting it off on the side, you know what I mean?
There it is.
Yeah, that's right. So I think in that way it's kind of nice. I kind of get that But you mentioned interactive fiction, and it's not just text-based. Things like Telltale, the Telltale games, or Life is Strange, or another one, Stories Untold, was another
Which
one.
I haven't played yet, but I've heard that's quite cool.
Where I don't know, because it's more of a lack of challenge. It's difficult choices, but they make it seem like, in the end, there are variations that you get in the narrative, but in the end, it's really mostly linear, right?
Yeah.
Just with it's like branching, but then it comes back. They direct you back onto the main path, basically. So, is it really? Is that too much of a lack of challenge in those cases because it's kind of like hand holding?
In Telltale's case, I think you may be right. I mean, I don't think of Telltale's games as particularly difficult, but a piece of interactive fiction like Make It Good, it's very easy to get stuck and to not know what to do next. So very similar to those moments in graphical point-and-click adventure games where you're just wandering around, you've got an inventory full of items, you're not exactly sure where to use it, and it's made especially difficult in Make It Good because so few of its puzzles are actually like apply object to other object puzzles, right? So it's like, so the puzzles, the content of the puzzles themselves is difficult. It's not just about, do I, do a good thing or a bad thing, or do I choose between two gray things or two bad things, which is like definitely a valid, design choice in and of itself.
Fair enough.
But yeah.
Well, let us know what you guys think out there of difficulty in games. Do you enjoy high difficulty, low difficulty curves, just straight difficult the whole way through, or do you like a little bit more casual, or do you like where it's like challenging but not like overly challenging because you're mostly there for like the gameplay and narrative sort of thing, which is my thing. Let us know what you think. In the meantime, we'll be starting a riot. This week on Starting the Riot, the very first game we're going to be talking about, as soon as hold on, let me start over. Get rid of that. So what happens when I don't do it for 3 weeks and I forget what I'm doing? Take 2. 3, 2, 1. This week on Starting the Riot, the very first game we're going to be talking about is Gris. Gris is by a company called Nomada. Is that how you pronounce it? Nomada. Is that what it is? Am I overthinking that?
Nomada?
I was pronouncing it Nomada, but I'm wondering if it's supposed to sound like Nomada. I don't know. I might just be an idiot.
Nomada.
Nomada.
It's no matter at all.
Hey, Gris, Nomada.
Yeah, I don't know.
Jeez. The devs are like, fuck's sake. Anyway. So they made a game called Gris. It's also being published by Devolver, one of those indie publishers that have a very good eye for games, except for what a lot of people think is was that Scum? I think it was that very controversial game. But anyway, the point is, this is one of those very artsy looking games, but it has cool. A little bit of platforming, a little bit of puzzle, a little bit of like Metroidvania-ish type thing going on with it. It reminds me a lot of like a 2D Journey in its aesthetic is what I'm trying to say, but with a little bit more challenge to it, because Journey was more about the implied narrative, right? Literally the journey, whereas this is actual more gameplay mechanics involved. Do you know much about Gris?
Well, yeah, I played it for a little while. So I can confidently say that it is absolutely stunningly gorgeous.
It is beautiful.
It is like mind-blowingly well. The art is
all hand-drawn, right?
Well done. As far as I can tell, yeah. So it's a it is a beautiful game. It almost pains me to say this, that it's difficult for me to give a really glowing review of its mechanics, because I feel like it could be a stronger platformer.
Well, I feel like if you're gonna give any kind of negative to this game, is that it's first and foremost a narrative storytelling game. Like it's about atmosphere and narrative, right? And it takes the game mechanics, the gameplay mechanics are almost like a secondary, not an afterthought necessarily, but they're secondary to everything else. And they do several different things between puzzles, platforming, and a little bit of the action part of it, where it kind of feels like they could have focused in more on certain things, I think.
I mean, I think it's it's a dev to watch for sure.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, and again, like I cannot overstate the art direction and the atmosphere. But I'd like to see I'd love to see this developer sort of tighten the gameplay a little bit going forward.
Sorry about that.
Bless.
Yeah. Definitely. They kind of came out of nowhere for me. I think they were recently nominated for an award an award of some sort. But I can't remember.
Yeah, they were nominated. Were they nominated in the Game Awards?
Was it?
I think so. Yeah. I'm not positive on that though.
I'm not sure. Maybe, but anyway.
I thought that was where I first heard of them.
You can actually get them on PC and Nintendo Switch for those of you who prefer to play on consoles. That's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I think the point of this game is definitely more more atmospheric than anything else, and I think the rest is kind of like it might feel a little like not enough fulfillment for the gameplay mechanics. But I think if you have to go into it with the right expectations, you know what I mean? Like it's you go into it saying like, okay, there's going to be some like gameplay mechanics here for puzzles and platforming or whatever, but it's not really what I'm here for. I'm here for the beauty in the narrative, and also the music, and then I think you'll enjoy it immensely. Like what it seems like most people have. I think I don't have Steam open, but I think on Steam, like it's like the positive reviews for that are like, and then definitely in like the mid to high 90s.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You can, by the way, if you enjoy the art a lot, which it is beautiful, you can get prints. And there's one print on here that I just freaking adore. If you go on their website, I'm going to say Nomada from now on, just because I like Nomada.studio. At the bottom, they have the prints listed, and there's one on the left says Gris by Asia Ladowski, which the colors in that I think is what gets me more than anything else. But I would absolutely hang that up on my wall. Anything else? I should say regarding the story. I'm not going to spoil anything, but like essentially the main, I guess, summary or the concept of the story. You play as a young girl named Gris, who is dealing with something painful that happened to her in her life, and you're kind of going through her like manifested sorrow, her looking at her the description now, they're saying sorrow is manifested in her dress. So, and I guess, okay, so she's manifesting the sorrow that she's getting from her, whatever happened to her in her life, and in that dress, that's like her power is coming from that dress. So you can see in the gameplay where she's like, kind of like thwomping on certain items, using the dress, kind of turns into a cube. It's that sort of thing, and where some of the gameplay mechanics come from is in that dress. So. Another thing, I feel like this was another game that would make me feel kind of like how Papo and Yo did a little bit. If I were to play it the whole way through.
No.
And I know you own that, but you didn't get a chance to play through that game yet, right?
I haven't played it. No, it's been on my list for quite a while. I should get on that.
You should, if you wanna feel sad. But anyway, Gris by Nomada. You should go check that out. Can you tell me the price on Steam, because I do not have Steam open?
Yeah. So on Steam it is $16.99.
There you have it. Well, you know what sometimes costs $16.99 to get into?
Peep shows?
Peep shows, sometimes.
Only the best.
The best ones, that's the top tier peep shows. So here we go. Peep show.
Please give all your attention to Early Access.
This week on Peep Show, we're talking about a game called Mittelborg, City of Mages. I don't know why I gave it that weird voice, but I did. That was my decision, and I'm sticking with it.
It's good. It's integrity right there.
Mittelborg is... I really enjoy these kinds of games. I kind of come across them randomly a lot, where it's I guess a strategy resource management type of game. But this is mixed with some turn-based and some roguelike and some survival kind of situations. But a lot of times it's Reigns is kind of like in this genre where you get these, it's basically like text coming across your screen. You have these choices to make, where, you know, it'll, based on your decision, it might use up certain resources, or it might take you in this direction or the other direction. Another one, there's a game on Steam. Now I gotta look at Steam. Hold on a second. Well, of course, I'm not gonna be able to find it. I'm not gonna look at Steam. Never mind. Anyway, the point is that there's this weird like subgenre of these games coming up out of nowhere, and they're always really interesting and good and fun. And they tend to be very addictive. By the way, this game is by a company called Armature Games. I feel like I want to say amateur, and like as if they like misspelled it, but it's Armature is how it's spelled. How they describe it is a single-player fantasy saga. Tells about an upcoming collapse of the world with emphasis on decision-making. This game is a wild mix of turn-based strategy, roguelike, and survival. I want to know, what do you think of like a lot of these games that mash up these genres? Does it sometimes feel like they're doing it for the sake of like, this hasn't been done before, so we should do it? Or is there a legitimate like, this could really work well?
I mean, I think it goes both ways. I mean, there's an entire school of creative thought that argues that like truly original ideas are impossible. That the only thing, the only way that innovation comes about is through the combination of existing ideas. I couldn't argue for or against that position in any meaningful way because I'm not versed enough in the argument. But I mean, also, like, I will definitely say that over the course of my game development experience, identifying aspects of genres that, a developer likes, and then figuring out what they like about it and how that fits in or suggests other mechanics. I mean, this is the big difficult thing about coming up with novel mechanics as a game developer. Sometimes the only way to really bring out, an innovative dimension is to take one aspect of one mechanic and recontextualize it. So I totally think that there is a legitimate and valid approach. But yeah, that doesn't mean that some instances are not just like, oh yeah, let's take these two things and try to jam them together and see if it works. Brutal Legend, great example of that.
Well, sometimes too, it's like it's more of a like, these are my favorite genres. Let me see if I can combine them all into one, make a great game. And sometimes it comes off as a bit forced.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can. I mean, so I guess it's like anything else. It can work sometimes. It cannot work other times. I mean, I'm in the process of conceptualizing a game myself with some friends where we're trying to figure out if there is a if there's a thread between survival gameplay and like old school survival horror gameplay, and if we can manipulate that in an interesting way. So I think, now, it depends.
I mean, this game is an alpha, so maybe there's a lot of stuff that's not in the game yet that they're expecting to be in the game. But I will say that the way they say it's a game with a mix of turn-based strategy, roguelike, and survival, it's almost, it feels like it's almost a stretch. And again, I think this game is a good game, but I feel like their description of it may be a stretch, because it's like turn-based. Well, it's like it's more of a simulation, I think, from what I gather in my limited experience with the game, because I've not seen any, like, when I think turn-based, I think, okay, there's some sort of avatar, of some kind of on the screen that you control, and it is your job to create a strategy in order to beat the other NPC. You know what I mean? Or the other player, if it's multiplayer.
It's interesting.
Whereas this is like text-based, and it's like, okay, here are your options, and then it kind of is like RNG.
So when I see like turn-based strategy versus real-time strategy games, I think immediately less of like turn-based role-playing games or like tactical games like XCOM, and more of like Civilization.
The 4X games.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I guess this is closer to something like what Civilization would be. It's absolutely not a 4X game, but in the sense that Civilization kind of is the same thing where, okay, you're building up these things, and then it comes up to you with like, here's what happened in the last turn. What's your decision? What are you going to do from this point? Sort of thing, except with more decision making in at the time of those messages. If that makes sense.
It's funny, because reading this description, it actually sounds like it might share some things in common with Frostpunk.
Yeah, but Frostpunk, you're still controlling. That's closer to like Dwarf Fortress, where you're controlling these people, and you're micromanaging in that way. And this is very much like, you're taking a step farther back, and you're not controlling the people. It's just like, it's almost like, I don't want to say stat sheet simulator, like kind of like how like some of the sports simulators are, like Football Manager or whatever. But you have like these resources, and then you choose like, I want to create these, or I want to use these, and I want to set up upgrades here, or set up some troops over here,
right? That
sort of thing. It's all very disconnected from the world that the game takes place in.
Right.
And it's not a bad thing for what it is, but I feel like for how they describe it, you may be, if you're looking into this game, you may be disappointed if you're going into it thinking like, oh, this is decision making with these things that you're used to. Because when you think turn-based strategy, you're like Civilization or a 4X game, or a game like XCOM, or even a JRPG, which is technically turn-based, and roguelikes like Enter the Gungeon or Binding of Isaac. It's not anything like that. Survival, when I think survival, I'm thinking The Forest or Minecraft, or those kinds of games, and it's not really anything like that. It's survival aspect of it is more like resource management, and the roguelike is like, I mean, you can play, it's more about the replayability, and the fact that every time you play there's different stuff that happens, and the turn-based is more RNG, is what it seems.
Interesting. So how would you classify this game if you had to give it a genre?
Simulation.
That's
what I would give it. And again, I'm not saying that, I actually think this is a good game from my experience with it, but it's not what it is, what it comes off as initially when you are going into it as a player. So if you're not into these sorts of like, I'm trying to think of a game that's, like I've said, if you're not into like Reigns is a much more simplified version, I think. But if you're not into like Reigns or games like that, where it's very much just managing and simulation, you're probably not going to be into it. I happen to be into those sorts of things, so therefore I like it. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Everything sounds good to you, man.
What can I say? I'm easy to please. But I'm actually not. I'm actually incredibly picky.
I beg to differ. You are pretty easy to please, we know what I'm saying.
Maybe relatively speaking, or maybe it just comes naturally to you, Josh.
Well, it takes a man. You know what does not take a man? Because anyone can play them.
Would that be mobile games?
Yes, and we're going mobile.
Huh?
This week on Going Mobile, we're talking about Donut County. Donut County actually has been nominated for a couple awards, I think, including something at the Game Awards. But Donut County is definitely a... by the way, it's by Ben Esposito, if you did not see that. But it's definitely a... I don't want to say casual necessarily, but I mean, because it is on mobile, but you can play it on Steam and on PC, that sort of thing. But essentially, the point of the game is that you are this mischievous raccoon who sunk everyone into a hole. And throughout the game, you're kind of going over what happened. And you're playing, the point of the game is to sink as much crap as you can. It kind of reminds me of Katamari Damacy. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I'm getting strong Katamari vibes off of it.
And instead of like rolling everything up, you're just making everything sink into a hole. And the hole gets bigger, much like Katamari Damacy, where as the ball gets bigger, the more stuff you roll up. The hole gets bigger, the more stuff you suck into it. Or make fall into it, and therefore you can, the bigger it gets, the more stuff you can fit in, like whole houses and stuff like that, and the people that live there. And the story ends up, okay, well, you're blaming everyone, you're kind of meeting everyone that lives in the area and that sort of stuff. And eventually, there's a big boss battle at the end without spoiling it. And by the way, the boss battle is actually pretty good. Again, it's kind of harkens back to that whole pattern learning thing, but it is challenging enough, and it's fun to play. But it's definitely it's just a fun game to just play. Like, it's not a whole lot of thinking involved, but at the same time, it's hard to put down, if that makes sense. You're gonna get to see some of the gameplay here at the beginning. So you see you're this tiny little hole. You're like sucking up little rocks and little shards of whatever that is. The hole gradually gets bigger the more of these things that you suck in. So that you can fit more stuff, and now he's going to be able to fit in that like jar and maybe that little box. There you go. And eventually they'll suck all that stuff in. So there's not a whole lot else to say about this other than the fact that I really enjoy the art. It reminds me a lot of a game that we covered a while back. Not as crude in the aesthetic, but it reminds me of a game called Discourse that we covered a while back. Did you ever hear of that game?
Discourse? No.
Yeah. If you get the chance, you can check it out. You can check out a review, or you can just go on Steam and look it up. But it's an interesting game. And I'm just talking the aesthetic, not the gameplay, because the gameplay for Discourse is very much not this. But anyway, I don't know. There's a lot of like small details in this too that I appreciate. Like, you just saw some of the gameplay, like the character that's doing this is like slowly watching the hole move around, like, what the fuck is that? And it's just kind of watching it. Now he's watching it from the window. Just little things that if you pay attention, you kind of notice. You're like, that's cute. Cute, I think, is a good way to describe this whole game, to be honest.
Sure, looks pretty cute.
Yeah. All right, take it easy there, buddy. So like I said, if you're a mobile player, because you mentioned some people just love fucking playing on mobile, you can play this game on mobile. I think there's a thing too, if you don't break stuff, I think you get more points or achievements or something like that, so there's some additional challenge if you choose to follow that. So it's not just strictly casual. if that matters to you. But again, if you don't want to play on mobile, it is available on Steam. What is it, $10 or $15 on Steam? It's your job, man. It's your job.
I know. I was there, but then I was on Discourse. It's let's see, it's $14.49 Canadian, so that is $12.99 US.
I should point out that mobile is only on iOS systems, which kind of is annoying to me, but that's how it is. Let me ask you something about this. This game, the same exact game on iOS is $4.99, and yet it's $13 on Steam for the same exact game. What? Now I understand people aren't going to pay $13 for a game on iOS, but at the same time,
yeah, the content is identical, right?
Well, yeah. Then why would people want to pay $13 on Steam? You know?
Yeah, I don't know.
Explain that to me. And it's not just this game. It's a lot of mobile games that have ports like this.
Yeah, I guess it's just some sort of horrifying fact of the mobile market that they'll just always get the games at a fraction of the cost in exchange for not getting access to all of the games. Not sure how I feel about that.
Well, anyway, that is
take it up with Annapurna Interactive, I guess.
Again, Steam, PS4, you can get on GOG, and then any iOS system. Donut County by Ben Esposito. Do you have any last words about Donut County?
No. I honestly, it's funny because I was actually going to ask you about Annapurna and whether or not they counted as indie, because playing Ashen, which is also an Annapurna title, it made me wonder, because while they are relatively new to the game scene, they've been doing film and television for a couple of decades now, I think. So I wondered if they counted, because technically, I mean, they are an indie film studio as well. So I wondered if they fit your specific criteria, because I know that you're kind of a stickler.
I know Donut County, just as a specific game or by itself, is because I believe they were all self-funding and self-made. It just, the publisher was strictly for distributing and PR.
Yeah.
And they might have helped them with ports, maybe to PS4 and stuff like that, but essentially the game was made by just Ben Esposito or whatever people he had helping out, maybe. So there's that. Ashen seems to be much more well-funded to me.
I don't know that it is, honestly.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know for sure, but it just comes off that way. I'd have to look in more into it. As a whole, I would say at this point, I'd be okay with maybe calling that publisher indie. We'll see how their publishing library grows, as time goes on.
Yeah.
Depending on how they conduct their business.
And they exploded onto the scene with when they published Edith Finch, which was a big deal, for sure.
I mean, and at this point, all the games that they published have been, very well polished, and they might have helped out a little bit, but it not to the extent of not to the extent of Life is Strange or something like that. You know what I mean? Where.
Yeah, I don't know. Even Edith Finch is weird because that was made on Sony money. Sony Santa Monica, financed the they gave them a bunch of money after they made the unfinished Swan, right? So, and they that studio actually, the last I checked, they actually operate out of the Sony Santa Monica building. So
probably at this point, I would not call them indie then, if that's what's happening with them, because I think it depends on the influence from, Supergiant Games is published by WB,
right?
But I don't know how much of their resources are really going into the game outside of just the publicity and
yeah. Well, at this point, I believe they're fully financed by WB money. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Not positive.
Which is why we didn't talk about what's the game they just came out with? I can't think of my.
Pyre.
Yeah, it was one reason we didn't talk about Pyre because there was questions to that, and I was like, all right, well. That's always a discussion that we could have for hours and hours of what is indie and, where to draw the line. It's hard to say, honestly. And no matter what games that we cover, like someone could be like, well, they got money from this person. So indie. I'm like, all right, man. And,
film is easy. Film is pretty clearly delineated. Like, indie is basically a tax category of film. Like, so
maybe that's what games should do from now on. It's follow that lead, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know how much they do. I mean, I don't know. The people to ask would be the financiers, because there are tons of financiers that have funds that are strictly for indie. So it'd be interesting to see how they define independent in order to give money to indie ventures.
Right. Well, that said, if you'd like to give money to us, because we're definitely indie. You can do so by going to patreon.com/Indie Game Riot, or you can subscribe here on Twitch, especially if you have like one of those free Amazon Twitch Prime things or whatever the fuck they are now. It's always very helpful. Helps keep the website up and running, the hosting and all that sort of stuff, and improving, and it goes, it can help with IRX too, which I announced earlier, all that sort of stuff. So we really appreciate it if you'd like to do that. Other ways that you can help us is by sending us things like news or games to check out, by contacting us on Twitter at IGF Podcast or Facebook.com/IGF Podcast. Of course, you can email us, contact@indiegameriot.com. And again, we have a Discord you can join. That's where a lot of stuff happens community-wise, is on our Discord as of recent. So a lot of devs on there. So if you're a dev, a lot of cool people to talk to that are into the same sort of thing. Nice. Of course, everyone's a fan of indie games, obviously. What are your last words?
These are my last words.
And that's when he died. I guess these are my last words too. You're gonna give your closing.
Well, no, fuck. Now these are my last words. And now those were my last. Now you've caught me in the last words loop.
This is a song that never ends.
Fuck up. That's my goodbye.
Toodles.